Throughout the history of Freemasonry, there have been many brothers who have come and gone over the past several hundred years. Today, I'm going to do a book review on the life of one of the more particularly fascinating brothers, that being Count Cagliostro. I may have gotten the name pronunciation wrong. There's different ways I've heard it pronounced. So like many who walk this path, I read a lot. And not all of the books that I read are entirely on the arcane or the hidden. I like to also read history books. I like to read about where we came from, where the order came from, and all the fascinating people therein. And I got this book probably about a year ago, and it's been sitting on my shelf. It was part of my reading list, and I finally got to get to it. And it was really good read. I read this in about 2 weeks. So I wanted to share it with everybody. I'm going to start doing some book reviews on some of the things that I'm reading. So the Egyptian Rite. This book talks about the life and death of Count Cagliostro and his Egyptian Rite. The Egyptian Rite has always fascinated me because the Egyptian Rite is the root of a lot of current day ritual. But finding an actual copy of the original Egyptian Rite is almost impossible. This book claims to be to have it in its whole. So there is an Egyptian Rite in here. We'll talk about that momentarily. The Egyptian Rite would go on in Masonic history to have a very colorful journey. It became, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, known as the Memphis Rite, or it got adopted and changed to the Memphis Rite, to the rites of Mishram. It would become outlawed or made clandestine for a time. A lot of the Scottish Rite allegedly pulls from it before it would come back and be reinstated as the Memphis Mishram Rites in the late 1800s. And then it would be retired permanently in the 20th century. No one can really give a good reason why it was retired. I've heard a lot of different reasons for it. For me, the Egyptian, the Egyptian roots of the mystery schools have always fascinated me. Of course, my moniker is the Desert Viking, so I've done a lot of Nordic research, but Egyptian, the whole Egyptian ecology called to me from a young age. My patron, for lack of better words, is Anubis, and so I've always had a pull to this Egyptian rite, and I've read different versions of it, and so it was neat to see where it actually came from. Because one of the other legends is that the actual alchemical formula for creating the Philosopher's Stone is buried in the Egyptian rite. Now, we've talked about alchemy before. You can go through a playlist and find my video on alchemy. The jury's out as to whether is the Philosopher's Stone a real object, or does that just mean spiritual alchemy, where you transmute your lead soul into gold? Is it both? As you'll find, if you delve into alchemy, there are assertions that it's real and that there have been people who have partaken of the Philosopher's Stone and have been granted immortality, such as Nicholas Flamel. Cagliostro is another one who supposedly is immortal and might still be alive. These are fun to think about, right? Can't prove that that's true or any of that, but it's fun to think about. So Count Cagliostro would be definitely an esoteric Freemason. If he was alive today, he would be someone that, he'd have a YouTube channel and he'd be talking about all the stuff I do with a vastly larger audience, I'm sure. He was a Freemason who believed that the Masonic ritual was cut short, or it didn't go far enough, or it was truncated maybe, and that it could do more. And he never intended to create his Egyptian rite to replace Freemasonry, but as to augment it like an appendant body. It would be an appendant body today. and that he had 3 degrees inside of that, which paralleled the Blue Lodge degrees. One of the requirements, though, was that you had to have your master, you had to be a master mason. One of the things that drove Freemasons into an outrage with him, though, is that he allowed women into his order. And so that obviously goes against the fraternity. So it is always seen as a clandestine thing. And in fact, the Egyptian rites are still practiced by irregular or clandestine Freemasons today, from what I understand. Cagliostro, his background is unknown, from what he claims. Any type of history you read on this individual, most of it's slander. Freemasons scoff at him. He's one of the weirdos of the past. But funny enough, a good portion of modern ritual still draws from some of his ideas, allegedly, and he has had a lasting impact since his death, which was over almost 250 years ago or so, close to 250 years ago. He traveled quite a bit. He saw quite a bit. So when we go through the book, it gives you the history of the man is part of the book, and it tells you about his travels and where he's gone to. And he kind of he was very popular wherever he went. He was at the same fame level in Europe as a Paracelsus was, or Paracelsus. I don't know I've heard different ways to pronounce his name as well. Paracelsus was a doctor in the 1500s who made a heavy impact on esoterics today. A lot of what was written about in the Middle Ages on up were rooted in Paracelsus's bringing back knowledge from the archives of history. And he was said to have been able to make wondrous cures that cured people of anything. And he had the secret of the arcanum. And allegedly he was murdered because he was also kind of a dick. He made people mad. Well, Cagliostro also made people mad for different reasons. He was one of those. He had, it seems like he had pure intentions, but just really, he had a need to be in the spotlight. He had a need to be recognized, and that kind of rubbed people wrong. Talks a little about the Emerald Tablet. The book kind of goes into what alchemy is, astrology, theurgy. It gives you a basics for esoterics in general. But if you're reading this book, the assumption is that you're already kind of into this, I would think. I don't see this like a random person off the street picked this book up. Other than, well, maybe the Masonic magician might interest them to try to find the secrets of all of our nefariousness, which don't exist in this book. So sorry, guys. One thing that was interesting, so they go over some of his contemporaries at the time, the inspiration for Cagliostro. And a big one was Martinez de Pascali, who he was another interesting figure that I had read about a couple years ago. He was the founder of a theurgic order of Freemasons called the Lewis Cohen, which didn't last very long. And Pascali was also kind of seen as a weirdo. He was big into taking Freemasonry and blending it with ceremonial magic and theurgy, which is the art of uniting with God, the divine. And, of course, when he died, his order died with him. But this book heavily insinuates that a lot of the Egyptian rites came from Lewis Cohen's rituals and beliefs. And another place where you're going to get exposed to that, should you be inclined, is if you were to look into Martinism, because one of Pascali's students was Louis Claude Saint Martin, who was he he established Martinism. It's his namesake. Now, Saint Martin disavowed theurgy. He came to the conclusion that theurgy was not the path to uniting with God, but it was from mysticism that would unite yourself with God. And Saint Martin, his second teacher was who I call French Jesus, but he was a big time mystic in France, and taught Saint Martin all kinds of different mystic treatises and whatnot, and that resonated with him. And so the Martinist order today is kind of seen as like a mystic Christian sect of study that you can do. They are an independent body of Amorc. So if you're interested in Martinism, you can go that route and learn a little bit more. Pascali has several books you can find on his reintegration theories, which is essentially Christian Kabbalah. So anyhow, so Egyptian Masonry largely stemmed from that, or was heavily influenced by that, the book alludes to. And then so on through the ages. And they give some more of his contemporaries. Most of these people aren't anyone. You'd have to be a big esoteric history nerd to recognize a lot of these names. These are from, the 1700s. So I'm not going to go over any of those. You can check those out. So he was said to be a master magician, psychic, alchemist, and healer. So like Paracelsus, Cagliostro had allegedly the ability to heal people, and he performed healing miracles on people. He was also allegedly the word of several brothers in a Masonic lodge witnessed him transmute lead to silver. They swear it, that they saw it. So he was big into alchemy. And the Rosicrucian connection as well. So he's an all-around fascinating individual from an esoteric standpoint. He mirrors a lot of the people I run with, and not that I'm at any level of, I can't turn lead to silver, but these are the type of people that fascinate me, however. And what happened with him is he ended up getting arrested for fraud. Queen Antoinette and King Louis, some jewel debacle. Some street lady convinced Madame Antoinette to buy these jewels that never materialized, and somehow Cagliostro his name was drug into it, even though he wasn't even anywhere near France at the time when this happened, and he was imprisoned for a while unjustly, and that caused quite an uproar. That was quite the news spectacle of the day. He was released, and he basically left France. Now, this was shortly before the French Revolution. So France had a little corruption problem, as history tells it. And then they had a little guillotine problem afterwards, which was only a problem if you were part of the corruption problem, or so they say. But he was banished from France. And then he continues to make his way around, where finally Rome wants him. Now, he's been trying to set up all these Freemasonic lodges throughout Europe, and he's trying to sell people on this Egyptian Masonry thing. He makes a questionable choice to head to Rome, probably the last place I would head to if I was an esoteric Freemason in the 1700s, because the Roman Church doesn't like Freemasonry and doesn't like anything that challenges their beliefs, as we know, and they were still putting people to death back then. And unfortunately, his wife betrays him. She sees a way out. She thinks she's going to have this great life, and the church ends up putting her in a nunnery where she ends up dying later. But he is imprisoned again, and he ends up getting sentenced to death after a sham trial, and they have him locked up in like this fortress, basically. And he ends up dying in prison, allegedly. Now, Again, legend has it that he partook of the Philosopher's Stone, which grants immortality, and he's still alive today, and they got him out of there somehow. It makes for a neat story. Of course, there's no proof of any of that, but that is the life of Cagliostro, and that is what a good portion of this book talks about, which is, again, it's a fascinating story. Now, a lot of they have all the middle part of some interesting pictures. In the second part, they kind of go into stonemasons and the history of the Masonic order. Another potential, it deals with the stonemasons and the first writings of Freemasonry. The first edicts that we know about came in the 1500s. Are called the Shaw Edicts, and that was in 1599. And Shaw was an individual who was not a stonemason, but he was. They speculate this was the beginning of speculative Freemasonry, where he was, where those were men who were not actual stone workers, but they were there to speculate and to apply moral traditions and symbologies and lessons, etc., onto the working tools and whatnot. And some of the statutes are quite interesting because they talk about memory work, committing things to memory. So we know that the Freemasonic fraternity goes back a lot longer than the 1700s, but the first written, according to this book, lodge records or any type of lodge was in 1599 with the Shaw Edicts. The first actual written down ritual that we have on record is from the Edinburgh Register House manuscript, which is 1696. And that details Blue Lodge rites. So that's the earliest, according to this book, rites. And they actually have some of the catechisms in here, the questions and answers, and how they relate to alchemy. So there was definitely a big push in back then to integrate alchemy and Kabbalah and whatnot into the lodge. This book talks a little bit about that. It talks about the history of Freemasonry in the 1700s. So if you're interested in like that type of thing, that's useful. And then it goes into part 3, which is the actual Egyptian Freemasonry itself. And it gives you a primer on what that's supposed to be, understanding that we have very little of Cagliostro's actual writing or news or words to describe where he came from. All we have are his ritual to kind of get an idea where his head was. But it goes over the entire, what they call the ritual. They claim this comes from a manuscript in Scotland that was rescued in France when Cagliostro's house, which was basically a replica of like an Egyptian temple, which would have been awesome. That was ended up, I think that structure still stands and many, many people have lived there throughout the ages. What a story that building has to tell. But the manuscript was rescued and translated to English. So they go over the full ritual, and a lot of it has nothing to do with Egypt. They feel that it's encoded in some way. And then they kind of discuss it. And it goes into some other, it goes back into some more alchemy and talks about the magical alphabet, which Paracelsus resurrected, which is it's an alternate take on Hebrew. So anyhow, I finished this book, The Masonic Magician, The Life and Death of Count Cagliostro and His Egyptian Rite. I highly recommend you check it out if you're interested in the history of Freemasonry or the life and times of this very interesting individual. Leave a comment on what you think of this book. It was definitely enlightening for me. And I'm going to give you a twofer today. I'm not going to do a whole review on this, but another book that I find very interesting, and this has nothing to do with the Masonic Magician, but this is the Book of Tokens, Tarot Meditations by Paul Foster Case. And what this book is poetry or meditations on the 22 Hebrew letters and their tarot correspondences. So if you are learning, like myself, Hebrew in their association with the tarot, that book I have found to be quite good. So there you have it. That's my little book review today on Count Cagliostro. As I move through my library and I read other books, I plan on highlighting some of these. I also want to get back to doing some readings, maybe do some Gnostic texts like Pistis Sophia. We'll see how that goes. We'll see what's in store. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, stay educated, stay inquisitive, and we'll talk to you later.